This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
One of the first Christian traditions that believers begin to question is Christmas. Is it pagan or isn't it? Does celebrating Christmas constitute sin? Well, if not, what's the problem? So Luke and Katie Abafi join us tonight to recall their journey creating a documentary around the Christmas question. Because it's the end of the sixth day, the sun has set, and this is Shabbat Night Live.
As they take this message out into the world.
Well, there you are. Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Welcome to Shabbat Night Live with Michael Rood. Luke and Katie Abafi are back tonight with one of the first questions believers have when they begin to have their eyes opened. What are we going to do about Christmas? Well, this is going to be fun. And a Christmas conversation is usually followed up with an Easter conversation, but we're going to talk about Passover first. On the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, there you have it right there, we are entering into the 11th day on the 12th month, which means we are only 5 weeks away from Passover. Wow. And that involves Angie Clark and David Robinson. Welcome to Shabbat Night Live,
Shabbat
guys.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Now, one of the first things, David, that we have in front of us is here's something that you had personally procured, and this is our love gift for this month.
Yes.
I thought when I saw this on the commercial and when I saw it on pictures that this was a plastic bowl. It's hand painted, but it's metal.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it is, and it's handcrafted, made in Israel. So it's a beautiful piece, and it's a little different than anything I've looked for. So I really like it.
Now, before the cameras came on, you were telling me something about this company that makes.
Well, that
makes
this right
that.
here.
Okay, well, tell us about that.
Yeah, this mezuzah is made out of olive wood, and it has a scroll that's tucked in the back, so it'll be against your house. But the company is a not-for-profit, and they actually employ people that are making Aliyah to Israel.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
really?
So that's why I really fell in love with them. Great people. I feel like we're working together to help people, but also to come up with good products for our.
Yeah, because that's quite often the issue, right? People make Aliyah, they get to Israel.
If they don't
have
know
a job.
someone, they don't have a job. It's a big step of faith. So she's trying to help them. Make the move a lot easier.
That is a brilliant idea. Now, something else that is close to your heart is the guy who's doing the teaching for this month.
That's right. My longtime best friend, Rodney Thompson, and you guys are going to really enjoy him.
Yeah, Angie, would you read off the back there just what this is all about?
Sure. In Matthew's account of the gospel, Yeshua says that we are the light of the world. But in some parts of the world, the darkness we are to expose is more intense than we can imagine.
Yes, and that's what Rodney deals with.
Yeah.
This guy, when he came here, we're always looking for spirit and truth. This guy brought the fire along with the truth. I'm so excited about his teachings.
It was really, we went to the probably the worst areas in Kansas City to do street ministry, and we took a bunch of what I call greenhorns, people in your congregation that have never done anything like that.
That's got to be a southern area.
And as we were driving into these bad areas, this really bad areas, right between the Blood and the Crips, there was a street.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it was bad. First thing we saw when we got out was some guy laying in the parking lot, But as we got closer and closer, all the fun at breakfast went away and everybody was like just scared to death. But we saw the power of Yahovah move in a way that just people were weeping that were able to minister to these people. And we gave them clothes, we ministered to them, prayed over, and it really changed their lives to see that we have the power over darkness.
Amen.
But we're afraid because we see things with our eyes and we're not looking towards what is unseen, we're looking at what is seen.
Right.
And so it can hinder our faith.
And Rodney's a perfect guy to lead people into that because he's been on that side.
He's been on that side, yeah.
He's seen, he was...
Had his car, he had a guy woke up, he was buying drugs, and the guy unloaded his 357 right into his car, at 3 feet away and missed him. Bullets were laying in the seat and everything, and
He's the real deal.
The guy just looked at him, laughed, and walked away. And so he's he's on fire. Is
Yeah.
an understatement.
He brought the fire.
He brought the
because
fire.
and sometimes we wonder why Jehovah leads us through or allows us to go through these choices that we make, but it's because of that very reason. He knows you're going to make it out on the other side, and he's going to use you for that purpose that, hey, you've been on that side before. That's why I had you go through this. So now you can minister to these
glory
people.
of the journey.
Oh, and Rodney's just like, he's
He's
fearless,
on
this
fire.
dude.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest things he's doing is, he talks about it in this love gift, is how he's doing FaceTime calls to India and Pakistan, where there are some young women there who are caught in sex slavery because they're of a lower caste system.
Right.
In India, they're the untouchables, I guess, or whatever. And so these girls are sold off and for not very much money to a not that you should be selling a person anyway, but to sultans and people like this, where he's trying to raise money now to release these girls. And in terms of American money, it ain't that much.
No, it's not at all.
And so we can really help him do this. He's literally doing these FaceTime calls, ministering to these girls. He has a translator on the other end.
Yeah.
And he's using this relationship he has to get in good with the Sultan and say, hey, can we buy the freedom from these girls that you have in your harem, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, he's building that infrastructure now with people in Pakistan and India, and that, for those people, is very dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, people die if they confess Jesus or Yeshua, and it's a really good ministry, and there's a lot of people getting behind it.
Yep. Now, speaking of getting people behind something, so we're 5 weeks away from Passover.
I know, it's hard to believe it.
We're still preparing the office here, so if you're coming to Passover, forgive us. We might be doing things up to the very last minute, but we've had a couple of staff events here where we've gone and cleaned up the place, and we've made some things ready, and so we're really happy to have you here. And so all three of us have been involved in that, and we're just really happy to bring folks in. And if you're only able to watch it online, that's great.
Yeah.
You're going to see Michael here,
That's
which
right.
is the greatest thing.
He is back.
Yeah.
He'll be back.
He's, and Michael hasn't,
4 years, three
It's been 3 years since we've had
Passover.
an in-house event.
And you know what's funny? I was talking to somebody the other day about Passover, and they knew about we were having a Passover event and this kind of thing, and I was doing a health consult with this person. And they said, I've heard this is Michael Rood's ministry, and I support the ministry, but I haven't even seen Michael. This is a person they've come in to see what's happening here on Shabbat Night Live and elsewhere. They know it's Michael Rood's ministry, and they're supporting what's going on here, even though they haven't even seen Michael yet.
Right.
It's amazing.
Listen,
it's great.
we have the best
We do.
support group
We do.
of our donors that I've ever seen in my life. Our ambassadors, they're our core group. And that's who I get to be one-on-one with daily. And thank you guys. We love you so much, and can't
You
wait
guys
to
are the
see
best.
you here for Passover.
And you're going to see Michael.
Yes.
Michael's going to be on the stage. He's so excited to be coming to this. And his progress has been amazing. I think all three of us would agree.
Absolutely.
Every time he comes in here, we see him once every week or every 2 weeks. And every time he comes in, we're just wide-eyed, shaking our head going, how can you be this well after what we saw 3 years ago? This is almost impossible.
Right.
So it's amazing. You're going to love it. And so Michael's coming. Mark it on your calendar. Make sure you get your ticket. There it is right there. And we will see you at Passover. And we'll see you guys at Passover too.
Yes, we'll be there.
Okay. Now, a big question indeed. Does celebrating Christmas constitute sin? Well, if not, what's the problem? Luke and Katie Abafi join us tonight to recall their journey creating a documentary around that question, the Christmas question. So, Bread and Wine with Michael is next, but you might want to get some popcorn too, because this is going to be fun. See you in a minute.
In Matthew's account of the gospel, Yeshua says that we are the light of the world. But in some parts of the world, the darkness we are to expose is more intense than we can imagine.
Making the gospel relative, I don't believe, is conducive to making disciples. We're not supposed to be relative. We're supposed to be set apart. We're supposed to be the answer to a lost and dying world.
Sharing experiences about his work to bring the Torah to Native American people here at home and to enslaved young women in the darkest reaches of India and Pakistan. Rodney Thompson brings a wake-up call to apathetic believers in Dealing with Darkness. Dealing with Darkness is our gift to thank you for supporting A Rood Awakening International. When you donate $50 to this ministry in March, we'll send you Dealing with Darkness on DVD or Blu-ray. Donate $100 and we'll send you Dealing with Darkness plus an olive wood mezuzah from Israel, featuring the Shema in Hebrew and English, inscribed both on the wood and written on a scroll inside. Donate $300 and we'll send you 3 gifts. Dealing with Darkness, the olive wood Shema mezuzah, plus a 10-inch decorative butterfly bowl featuring vibrant hand-painted artwork by artists in Israel. These gifts are a limited-time offer from Michael Rood to thank you for your support. Make your donation today and receive the $50 gift, the $100 gift, or the $300 gift. Get these exclusive thank you gifts when you make a donation to support A Rood Awakening International in March. Call 888-766-3610 or get your gifts online with a donation at monthlylovegift.com.
Folks around these parts tell me you're pretty quick with that shofar.
I am.
And that's a mighty purty holster you got there. You sure you can make me one?
I am.
Dude, why do you keep saying I am?
It's the name of God, dude. Yehovah. You know, I am.
Oh. There's only one problem with that, partner. You see, this Sabbath gathering ain't big enough for 2 shofar.
Are you saying we should draw?
I am.
Man.
The night of the Last Supper, Yeshua took arton, leavened bread, and he blessed the Most High, and he broke the bread and said, "This represents my body, which will be broken for you." He took the cup, and he blessed the Most High and said, "This represents the renewed covenant in my blood." The following day, on the 14th of the month of the Aviv, there were 2 large loaves on the wall of the temple. And when they took the first loaf down, after that, no more bread, no more leavened bread was eaten. Then when they took the second loaf down, that's when all of the leavened bread in the city of Jerusalem and everywhere else was completely expunged. It was burnt in the fire. That was the rehearsal that was done the following day, just before the Passover lambs were sacrificed in preparation for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But Yeshua represents in this very thing, in the breaking of the bread that we do, in the Kiddush, in the sanctification, every Shabbat, we remember that his body was broken for us. By his stripes, we were healed. And in the taking of this cup, as we say this prayer in thanksgiving to Almighty God, Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Yeshua said, "This is the renewed covenant in my blood. As often as you do this in remembrance of me." Every meal, any time, any Sabbath, any feast, any time that you need to remember his broken body and shed blood, we do this in remembrance of him.
Well, Well, there you are. When last we spoke, we were talking to some guests about a documentary called The Way. Luke and Katie Abafe joined us last week to tell us all about how that came about, the changes that happened in their lives, and how it all fit together. And today we're going to talk about their next project, which dove even deeper. So Luke and Katie, welcome back to Shabbat Night Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah, you know, and who else is here is, we can't see them right here, but they're in the studio with us. And Michael Rood and his wife, Anna Lil, are with us. And Anna Lil is from Costa Rica. And we were talking briefly before the cameras came on about, we're going to talk about Costa Rica and the tie-in with your next project that happened after The Way. And she piped up and said, what did you say about my country? So Anna Lil is from Costa Rica. And you guys had gone there for part of the filming of The Way. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so why did you go there in the first place?
The 119 Ministries team was in Costa Rica, and that's where they had made their headquarters. And so we went down there to interview John and Steve at the time.
Okay.
And then,
what a burden, first of all, going down to Costa Rica. I mean, that had to have been a really hard decision, right?
It's beautiful. People were so kind. It was just like you're in a postcard. I loved it. It was gorgeous.
Costa Rica is very nice, very nice. And but it was all business. It was like, we gotta make sure we have good shots. We have to. And anyway, so that's where we met those guys. And after The Way came out, and a few years passed, and she was just about to have Max. This is like 2018 or something like that. We talked. I think John Sherman from 119 reached out and said that they were thinking about kind of doing a documentary version of one of the teachings that they had done, which is similar to Michael Rood's Truth or Tradition.
Oh, Truth and Tradition, yes, classic. A lot of people find this ministry through that, yeah. Okay.
And so they said, well, we would like to do it give it the documentary frame. And so we thought about that and discussed it, and eventually we decided to do that.
Wow, okay, so this was basically, now if anybody doesn't know what Truth and Tradition is, that's where Michael dresses up as Santa Claus and says this is all bunk, essentially, and just explains why. Yeah. And there's a lot of research there, a lot of where did the Christmas tree come from? Where did this come from? Where did that come from? So this is then, I guess, for you guys, The Way, and then you kind of dive deeper on one of the first things people run into is either Sabbath or Christmas, typically, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, that's true. That was the first thing for my mom, and I didn't realize that till like we were already doing this film, where she said, "Chris, I'm not going to celebrate Christmas anymore." And so, yeah, it ended up tying into my personal life.
It's interesting how everybody. Did you talk to several people about how they came out of Christmas during this thing, or was that not the premise of how this one worked?
So with The Way, we were talking with a lot more people who had made changes to their life, but with the Christmas question, we were mostly talking to experts, researchers, historians. And so to give kind of meat and back up all of the assertions that we make about a lot of these trappings being pagan, or having at least pagan
roots, like
some sort.
So basically, we look at the tree. Does it really come from where we thought it come from? Like all these, is it just rumors, or is it true? Is there some tie-in? Those type of questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We talk about that.
And you're hearing from people who think that it's totally fine and can be part of a Christian faith, and you're hearing from people who think it's totally not okay, and putting those perspectives in conversation with there's a timeline throughout it, like a literal timeline on the screen where you see where different things were introduced, and like, oh, this came way before, any Christians were even thinking about this date, for example.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is more of a history lesson then. This is more of the Tim Mahoney style. Let's go back and see if the timeline matches up.
Yeah, he did a great job.
Yeah, he did. I loved his timeline in that.
On that wall where he slid it all,
Yep, the sliding timeline. Yeah, that's probably one of the best visual I think everybody remembers from that one.
Yeah.
Wow, so I remember how we actually stopped doing Christmas in our house. We were gradual about it because we already had kids in the house. They already experienced, well, my daughter was around, not my son yet, but she had experienced a couple of Christmases, so we're like, okay, how do we gently wade out of this? So one year, I took her we went and found some wood. We went specifically looking for old pallets that people were getting rid of. And I told her, we're going to make a manger for baby Jesus. instead of a Christmas tree. So together we made this little manger, and we took one of her dolls and we put it in the manger, and then the presents still went under the manger. But it was like one step away from the tree. So we didn't have the tree, we had the manger, and then the next year we didn't have anything at all, and then we kind of moved around doing that. But so let's dive into some of this then. So you dove into this, you found some things that were pagan or weren't pagan. What are some of the things that were like, okay, we assume as Torah observant believers that this is absolutely pagan. This one is pagan. Can you think of one thing that you researched and found like, yep, okay, that one we can absolutely be sure that this is truly quote unquote pagan without just giving it that name?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, mistletoe is a big one.
That's what came to mind
It's like,
for me.
yeah. And we interviewed another witch for this. It's like we're always interviewing witches.
They're popular guests on your podcast.
It's something about hearing it from a person, though, who identifies that way versus just your, Christian friend being like, this stuff is no good. This is, sometimes it's hard to hear things from your own family or people that you know, and so it's nice to have an external source who doesn't have a horse in the race or...
Yeah,
or
because
a different horse in the race.
It's part of their faith, so they're going to be really serious about that. We find that out with when I'm telling people about dietary things, and if they want to find out if, for example, a plant-based diet is good for you, they'll use not just a group that claims to be vegan or whatever, but they'll find somebody who has a religious reason for doing it. So, like the Seventh-day Adventists. In Loma Linda, California. That's a famous group that is quite often used for research studies because they don't make it just part of, health or whatever. That's part of their faith. So I guess that would make sense then for someone to go to someone who, yes, mistletoe is part of my faith. It's not just, maybe something I kind of do on the fringes. I'm not sure why as a Christian, but I do. That makes sense. So you go to a witch who's like, yeah, this means something.
Yeah.
So what does it mean something what does it mean to the witch?
Well, the Wiccan will want to defend the origins or the supposed origins of their traditions. And mistletoe, oh my gosh, it's actually probably a little too graphic and weird to describe the mistletoe
saucy
tradition. But it involves climbing up in oak trees and cutting down the mistletoe, like berries, which are these white berries, and then bringing it down for their celebration. And I won't go into all the details of all that stuff, but that was weird.
But there are adult connotations to all this, I'm assuming?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And anyway, mistletoe's definitely one of the traditions or trappings of Christmas that has pagan origins. And then the date is debated, hotly debated. It's like, early Christians were trying to date the birth of Yeshua, they say Christ, and they say they definitely were landing on December 25th before that. But we look deeply into those calculations, which looking at them has become called the calculation theory. And so we talked to this guy in Oxford, and he talks deeply about the calculation theory because his whole area of expertise is dating things, biblical things. And looking deeply into the calculation theory, you see that early Christians weren't dating the birth of Yeshua to December 25th. They were dating the conception of Yeshua to the spring, which could eventually be.
Yeah.
No, the birth of Yeshua to the spring.
Yeah.
And so that birth date then is kind of changed to conception by people who read that. They read this old historical document and look, this guy was landing on March 25th for the birth because they say aligned with the creation of the world years before.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
I'm probably butchering all this, but they said, well, he could have meant, that word could mean conception, or maybe he meant conception because that would align with December 25th. Anyway.
Gotcha. So just like in Hebrew, for example, the word virgin has more than, it means young woman or truly a virgin or whatever. It kind of has all roundabout meanings. I could see how they would construe that. Huh, interesting. So, well, what's funny is if you look at when the Magi arrived to visit the young child, which we all know now Yeshua was, 14 months old at that time, right? So, but if you look in the chronological Gospels, That's pretty much right around this time, so at least I got one part right. Is what I always joke. So they had arrived around Hanukkah, and that's when they had visited Yeshua, and that's when Yeshua's parents received the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and it funded their escape to Egypt and all that type of thing. That was right around this time of year. So I've often wondered if maybe that's where it got all messed up. But did you ever find anything like that in your research?
I didn't look deeply into that, but that's compelling. That's interesting. It's such a big subject to tackle.
Yeah.
That was why originally I thought, I don't know if we should do this. There's too much here. Christmas, one, is the biggest sacred cow for believers. And two, it was just so big. And I thought, I don't know if we can like package all this into an hour and a half or whatever it ends up being. Because 80 minutes is like what you're shooting for, but are you gonna get more, less, whatever. So it was a little scary going into it.
I mean, with the date, there was a bit in the Christmas question about, when is the first time that Christians kind of claim this day as a birth of Christ celebration? And then is anything interesting going on that day prior to that? And like the answer is yes, very much so. Like Venerable Day of the Sun and those kinds of like celebrations. And even ancient cultures, like, one of the gentlemen we interviewed talked about Stonehenge and like Mayan sort of ruins and how things are aligning on certain dates and how that...
Specifically the winter solstice.
The winter solstice and how that was an important day for many ancient religions in their worship of the sun and that kind of thing.
Here's one interesting thing she made me think of it from the documentary. An argument Christians will use to say, well, December 25th is not the winter solstice, thus you're off by a few days because it's 21st or 22nd.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
But we're on the Gregorian calendar, and they, at the time, when all of Stonehenge was built, et cetera, and other things, not at the time Stonehenge was built, but later, when the winter solstice was being observed in Rome, they were on the Julian calendar, which has December 25th as the winter solstice. And so finding that out in the research, I thought, oh, whoa. So the winter solstice just shifted because we shifted from Julian to Gregorian. And that's a big deal because it's no longer like an argument that can be made on that side of the table.
Right.
Calendars become a big thing. I mean, Michael Rood would be the first to tell you that, like you get to the Hebrew calendar. And even today, I go to a Sabbath gathering where, they observe the rabbinic calendar. Okay, fine. And, we do Michael's calculated calendar, or not calculated, pardon me, the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, which is, the sighting of the first sliver of the moon. And so we're always off by a few days. Whatever, we just say, we just celebrate, I'll celebrate twice, once with them and then once with our family. But yeah, that becomes a big point of division, doesn't it? And that's the source of a lot of, I'm assuming a lot of traditions that have gone wrong or astray because of we're not recognizing the same day. I mean, is that right?
Oh man, yeah.
I never thought about the calendar that much until all of this. I mean, even just in a really basic way of reading the Bible, and when they say the 14th day of the first month, they're not talking about January 14th, which is obvious now that there is our Creator has a calendar. And his feasts and these special days are all lining up to points with that, and there's a whole rhythm to the year that's really nice. And there's a lot to figure out because there's been a big gap in a lot of believers celebrating these things.
Right. Well, and it's funny, I mean, I'm sure you guys know this, doing documentaries on the whole thing. It's just, you've got Christians on one side who don't agree, and then Jews on the other side who don't agree. And you're caught in the middle and nobody agrees with us. Are we right or what? It's sort of that question that crosses your mind. So tell me about there's something that we wanted to cover here with regard to all of this and the Christmas question, if you will, is the two Babylons.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about the two Babylons.
Oh man. Whoa. All right, so I started research for this documentary, which the research phase of this took so long, more than filming probably. But I'm drawing on things like Michael Rood's thing and other sources as well to see, all right, where are we? What's our understanding right now? And can we back all this up historically? And what are those sources? And so tracking all those sources down was the large part of that was the research phase. And so I had already seen The Two Babylons, this book, and by Alexander Hislop, and the heavily debated book over the years because a lot of people have panned it as just kind of anti-Catholic polemic or whatever you would say. And a lot of people have said no, but the sources he draws from were true sources, and et cetera, et cetera. So I started researching the sources in The Two Babylons, and I thought in this documentary, how far back can we go? Can we go back to Babylon? Can we go back to Nimrod? Can we prove it all? And if we could, are all these first sources existent? And so that was the challenge of this documentary, was seeing how far back in time we could go to draw, for example, the date of December 25th being linked to pagan roots. And so we went back before mentions of Christmas, but we didn't go all the way back to Babylon for various reasons. I couldn't get all of the sources that I wanted, at least on camera. So, yeah.
Some are just gone or inaccessible, or
yes, or there's or they're not blatant. You could insinuate that yes, this worship aligns at least visually or in some aspects with what we're currently doing for Christmas, but there's no source that says this is this. This is what we do. For example, the mistletoe is definitely linked to the pagan thing, and we're doing it for that reason. And that's what people want when they're like, we have to have this, or else it just doesn't count.
But the witch could sure tell us about that one.
Sure.
Yes.
Because it's part of her religion. It's part of her faith, right? So she was serious about it. So do you find that a lot about when you did this documentary, that a lot of what you found was gray area? Like, where did this come from? It just kind of morphed over the years, and how did it morph? We don't even know how it came to be.
Well, it's interesting because even in America's history, one of the first things I learned when making this movie is that Christmas used to be illegal in America. And I was like, how did I never hear that? You know, and reading things that the Puritans were doing, and how they took so much, Torah seriously, even like the law about stoning a rebellious son, like stuff like that was on the books for them.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. So
these are folks like the Quakers, or who was this?
I'm saying Puritans, but
Puritans were the ones that outlawed Christmas.
Okay.
Yes, and they were like, this is going to be a day that we work. It's not going to be. We're not going to have any part in that. And so it's interesting because in our kind of recent history, people were thinking about these things and keeping it separate. But then there was a big commercialization, I guess, of Christmas, and it all sort of like rushed in, it seemed like, at a certain point.
Interestingly, the Puritans, I believe, or at least a segment of the Puritans, observe their Sabbath from Saturday sundown to Sunday sundown. They think that it's Sunday, but they observe it sundown to sundown, which I thought was interesting as well. And they don't work, and they don't, a lot of the stuff came over, but it was mixed in with some of these traditions.
You know what's interesting about that? You say that. I didn't know that. My mother, who's 84, when she grew up in Canada, in the plains of Manitoba, she lived in this little German town called Halbstadt. Is the name of it. It's where she grew up. And they would do that very thing. They were very staunch Mennonites, which is not, like you'd see with the horse and buggy, like the Amish. This is sort of like, in Canada, Mennonite was kind of Baptist on steroids, put it that way. But he was a Mennonite minister, and the very strict Mennonites, the Mennonite Brethren, what they were called, they would do that. I remember her telling me stories of she was not allowed to go ice skating on Sunday. They did not work. They treated Sunday as a very strict Sabbath, but it was Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, and
that's interesting.
Yeah, there's laws about Sunday too. Punishments for working on Sunday too, in early United States history. So it carried over, but it was mixed with the tradition, as you guys have pointed out.
Well, we're going to talk more about this in just a second, but we're going to take a quick break. I want to thank you guys for being here. You drove all the way from Ohio to be here, so thank you very much. And it's to you guys. Thank you for bringing these guys here. We thank you for supporting Shabbat Night Live. That's the only way we can have these type of conversations that you can in turn share with other folks. That's how we do this. We pay it forward. So you donate to Rood Awakening International. Thank you very much. That allows other folks in the future to see those things that you are already aware of, and that you can help to forward this information to others, because we all know we need to get this information out as many ways as we can. With censorship coming down on every angle, we need to get this out in as many creative ways that we can, and your donations help to do that. We'll give you an opportunity to do that right now. Thank you. Thank you for your support of Shabbat Night Live. We were just talking about Christmas and how it all lines up. Luke and Katie Abafi, thank you for joining us once again. And we were talking about when the cameras went off for the break there, how calendars seem to, even in Messianic circles, the calendar is always a debate. It's never going to end, whatever. We just have to sort of just deal with that. But when you researched Christmas, you found that the opposite. Instead of having these two factions that don't agree, the what did you call it? The calendar, or the pagan wheel, and so how does that work? Where it did the opposite? It actually comes together and creates what you call a smoking gun.
Okay. Well, so we looked at the Christmas tree, we looked at mistletoe, we looked at all of these traditions and trappings to Christmas, and we looked at the date specifically. And I thought, we did our best to show how the date is linked or not linked to the winter solstice celebrations. And then what for me was the biggest revelation during researching the documentary was the fact that the Catholic liturgical calendar and the pagan wheel of the year line up perfectly. They synchronize as
That's scary in itself, first of all.
It's like the same, it's visually shown with a circle and then a circle on the outside, and then they're turning, and it clicks into place, and every single, Catholic holiday has a corresponding pagan high, they call their days a high.
Wow, so it's that closely related?
Every single one, all around the year.
Weirdly.
So it's not just Christmas, it's all of them.
This sounds like the Da Vinci Code.
To me, when I realized that, and there are a lot of holidays we don't even talk about anymore. Well, we do talk about Easter, and we do talk about Christmas, and how they line up with Yule and this. It's near this spring solstice.
So what others? Educate me here. What else do we not
There's
think
the Feast of John. Yeah, All Saints Day lines up with Halloween. No, I mean All Saints Day lines up with Samhain. Weirdly, why October 31st? And then the summer solstice is also the feast of, I think, St. John the Baptist on the summer solstice, which is another big celebration in certain pagan sects. And it's all of those. It's the spring solstice, the winter solstice, the spring equinox, the winter equinox, the summer solstice, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Michael Rood jokes that's how they get those four.
It's like that. And there's also footage of a modern sort of pagan celebration of the one on one side, and then kind of how it looks in Catholicism on the other side. And there are some similarities. Sometimes
they're still doing the same thing.
They're burning a big post. There's a big fire, and then the other one has a ton of candles.
So how they celebrate
it is the same. They look similar, yeah.
Oh, really?
Still, yeah.
No, to this day, which is so crazy. And so we in America are just stuck on Christmas, and we're stuck on Easter and the trappings of the Easter bunny and the eggs and how this is linked to certain pagan, fertility rites.
Semiramis and all that, yeah.
But then we could, if we wanted to, just jump to the next season, to summer, and look at how they're burning effigies of St. John, I believe, and in the summer solstice, they're burning a bunch of effigies as well. It's this huge feast. It's like as if these traditions pre-existed the universal church's entrance into that society, and they co-opted them and Christianized them, if you will, just as Pope Gregory.
So does that all back up to Constantine back in that far back, or is it just kind of all over the place?
Constantine, Sunday, and Easter, definitely, because he was sick of the Jewish calculations of dates of Passover, and he said, we have to get out of this. We can't be calculating. We're not going to be arguing amongst ourselves like these Jews. And all of this is big, polemic against the Jews and wanting to distance themselves from Jewish observation, which also happened to be biblical observation of Abib and the first of Abib and all the things that we're trying to do now. But yes, so they had the Council of, I think, Nicaea. You guys will know all this, where Easter happened, and then Sunday was actually March 7th, 321 AD, I think, when Constantine puts out his Sunday edict, and he says, you believers, Christians, must now observe the venerable day of the sun as their day, and not the Sabbath as the Jews would do. And then later there's a penalty. You get kicked out of the church if you keep observing the Sabbath. So it's like, it's
that happens today, as a matter of fact. You get kicked out of the church if you obey.
I guess not much has changed.
That has happened.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah.
Well, but not everything, not all of these dates, I think, can be traced back to Constantine, which is good evidence that it was a progression of adoption as Catholicism or corporate Christianity or whatever you want to call it moved its way through the world and became this enormous power that ended up being responsible for all sorts of evils. It adopted the pagan customs that it ran into to an extent, at least the trappings, the buildings. And that was another thing we show in the Christmas question, how a lot of the current modern day big, beautiful churches were, especially in Rome, were previously pagan sites. They were temples, literally temples, like the Pantheon. The Pantheon used to have a bunch of gods, and now it has a bunch of saints in all of the little...
so basically they say, well, that's going to be John the Baptist. That's going to be...
Yeah, which we know is expressly forbidden in the Bible. You know, it's always like when you come across these relics of idolatry, just destroy it completely. Don't turn it into something else, which is a big part of the Christmas conversation.
And praying to Mary and things like this, and that's where we get all this stuff from.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes, the one, I thought you need that wheel of the year, and you need the one verse, Deuteronomy 12:4, which is, don't worship me the way that the pagans worship their gods. And so if you can show that at least some of these trappings are the way pagans used to worship their gods, then why would we do it? Especially when he has given us such a rich, group of holidays to celebrate, which are so much more fun and tell the story of the Bible. Right. So
all in the name of saving a statue and renaming it. Well, that's a beautiful statue. We don't want to get rid of it. But there again, right? Yeah. Tear down their poles, tear down this, tear down that. We're told to go in, not adopt them and change them into something else. Like I always tell people, you know, if they're having these trunk or treat things for Halloween and things like this in church parking lots, you can't redeem something that was not Yehovah's in the first place.
Yes.
That's what redeeming is. You can't, redeem something that was never his in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's crazy, right? So yeah, it's expressly forbidden to do exactly what they have been doing.
Yeah.
Claim that temple and call it a cathedral.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, interestingly, it seems like at the time they were co-opting these days so that people who were converting from other religions or people who were wary of Christianity would feel more comfortable entering in. It's like, we already celebrate on this day, let's mark it with let's stamp it with something else that's more Christian. And it's funny because nowadays people will say, well, my unbelieving friends and family, they'll only come to church on Christmas or Easter. I'm like, that's the same thing.
Right.
Maybe it's like people feel so comfortable about it because nothing in these imagery is biblical. I mean, of course, the story of Yeshua's birth and all of that is obviously scripture, but a lot of it is not native to the Bible.
Yeah.
And it's still being used to keep people or get people to feel comfortable who wouldn't enter into biblical things otherwise.
Right, and that's my argument too, is that if someone's only going to come to church on Christmas or Easter, they're not going to come anyway, so don't bother. I mean, I'm sorry, it may sound a little cold and crass, but it's like, if they're only going to come to appease you, so you'll leave them alone for another 6 months, then just don't. Just ask them to come on the week after. What's wrong with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Anyway, you're about to say something.
Well, we almost use something in the film. It was this guy who I won't remember his name, but he used to be very into doing yoga. And then he became a believer and he was like, I'm not going to do yoga anymore because I think that the origins of yoga are steeped in like sun god worship and other worship. I mean, they have a lot of the movements that you're making, or some of them, are called things like
a sun salutation, where you're literally bowing, like you're bending over in half and like bowing. Yeah.
So his argument, which he didn't sadly carry forth to Christmas and Easter, was if we know these things were incepted and being used for the worship of a different God, then why use it for the worship of the Creator? And so he had, I'll have to remember his name, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to mention
there's a debate behind that one too. Is it just plain old stretching and it's what's wrong is what we called it, like bowing to the sun? Or
that nowadays is being co-opted by the church. Now you have holy yoga, you have Christian yoga. Like we want to do these things, but we don't want it to be smacking of any kind of pagan origin.
So it'll be worship music. What I was going to say is, when you hear from the people who claim these things, so like, yogis from India or something like that, they'll be like, this is a religious practice. It's religious.
Like the witch with the mistletoe.
Exactly. When you hear from like a witch about what she's doing on Easter or Yule, they'll tell you it's a religious practice, but then people who it's not even native to their history will say it's not. So it's like, should we listen to the people who...
Well, it's almost like if you talked to that yogi and told him what Christians were doing, would he get offended? Because you're taking his religious practice and muddying the waters with it and throwing in your religious practice with it. And he's like, no, that's from my people. That belongs with us. That's our thing. I mean, much like Halloween, right? Oh, that's our thing. Oh no, but we're going to turn it into trunk or treat in a church parking lot. It doesn't, it makes sense.
It seems like it's the societal norms that we're fighting for as Christians to keep the ones, like we eat bacon, right? I don't, but as a culture, as an American culture, bacon is huge. Everything is wrapped in bacon. And ditto shellfish and shrimp. And these things seem to be hang-ups, similar to Christmas and Easter being hang-ups, because societally they're accepted. No one goes to bat for dog and cat eating. No one goes to bat for bat. They're going for pork, and it's specifically that. And because that's what we're doing as a society. And it's the same thing with Christmas and Easter. No one is going to bat for the Feast of St. John the Baptist. No one cares, because it's not culturally part of our... And that is when I think that if we want to be honest with ourselves, we have to step back and do an evaluation of where we're coming from. Are we being honest? Who are we trying to appease? Are we trying to appease the continually eroding like values and morality of our modern day society, or Yah, who has constant morality? Anyway, that's all.
No, that's beautiful. I love that. And in a sense, it's reminded me of something you mentioned earlier. Constantine did the same thing. Everybody stop fighting. We're going to do this, and we're just going to push it all together and call it done. Well, that's what modern, like you said, is part of our culture now. We're just pushing together and calling it done. And not thinking where it came from, what it means, or anything. That doesn't matter. We're going to establish a new thing here, and it's unreal. Now, you tried to talk to some people about this, and nobody was available for some weird reason. So I don't know whether you view this as Yehovah stepping in or whatever. But tell us what that was all about.
Well, in all three, because we're finishing a project now, but all three of these projects that we've worked on deeply, in depth, over long period of months, we have seen the hand of Yah like working and guiding us to the right interviews and away from other interviews. And some of the most widely known experts on the other side of the camp who would defend, they're Christians and they're professors who would defend Christmas, and they would defend the day and the tree and all this. We reached out to them because we wanted them on camera and we wanted them to give their argument. We wanted to air it all. We wanted to air both sides of the story, which we did, but we wanted to have them. And several of the biggest of the bigwigs were unable to do the interview for health reasons, sadly. Two of them specifically. One of them didn't want to touch the topic because it was a little too hot. But the other two that was what happened. So sadly, those interviews weren't able to happen. But we still got great guys who were able to say the same things. They just didn't have the name, which is on the peer-reviewed papers. Those are the guys we were reaching out to. So, but we still got a lot of those guys too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that happens, I think, in a documentary or in anything you're doing. It shifts. Also, you think you know where the story is going. You think you have all the answers going in. And then as you research, you're like, oh, like the two Babylons, I thought, we're taking this back to Nimrod. We're going to do it. And we're going to do it with first, like, primary sources. Thank you, baby. And we took it back as far as we could, which is still before the mention of Christmas, but not.
Well, you know, that happens everywhere too. When Nehemiah Gordon is looking for manuscripts, I mean, he's the first to admit there are no manuscripts from 2,000 years ago. That doesn't work. They're all gone. They've disintegrated. So sometimes you can't go back to the original. You've just got to deal with what you've got, right? So. Well, I think Jehovah guided your hand there so that you wouldn't have those folks, and they never belonged in the documentary in the first place, right?
I guess not. I guess you're right. Just keep it together.
Now, Katie, you had mentioned something interesting before the cameras came on today, and you'd mentioned that you know, there's facts about where these things came from, and then there's sort of like this ambiguous, hard to put your finger on spirit of it all, that if you are awake in the spirit, you will see this. So tell me how that went.
Absolutely. I think when you look at some of the mythology and things surrounding the trappings of Christmas, the origins of Easter, you can see if you are, I'd say, a believer and you have sort of spiritual vision, how these things are traced through history. You see like, oh, I see that being connected to that and that and that, and you can follow the through line. And I guess that's a little bit different sometimes than what Luke's talking about with finding primary sources, where some historian from way back in the day is saying, yes, we did this for this reason and we were worshiping this. So there's just that element of like spiritual discernment versus like the history and the scholarship of it. And it's nice to bring both to bear, of course.
Yeah.
And in the Christmas question, it leaned more towards the
where we could get
the primary source material and all of that, but it doesn't mean that the other threads throughout history are not maybe true as well in some cases.
Yeah, like the two Babylons, it takes it back to Nimrod and it says, look at this. These two images are very similar, and how could they not be the same? How could this modern day worship or worship in primary sources we have not be the same as the worship that's written about by Herodotus, for example? But we don't have some documents that say this is that. This ancient Osiris worship is exactly what we meant to be doing on this date, because who would write that? So yes, you have to have some insight and to make that work. And I thought we got to do it without that, even though I don't totally disagree with that either.
Yeah. No, the same thing with when Miles Jones tells us about, for example, there's this cow ceremony, this almost like ancient rodeo where they're jumping on cows and things like that. Well, the same thing is found in Greece, but it's also found on the stones in Saudi Arabia, where it's supposed that this is Mount Sinai and this was the altar to the golden calf. You know, this imagery is not found in Saudi Arabia, it's found in Egypt. So what is it doing in Saudi Arabia? And what is it doing in Greece? And although they're separated by centuries, they look very similar, but someone could argue to the nth degree that they're not the same.
Right.
But then you have to go, like you said, to the spirit of what is really happening here. And instead of arguing about absolutes that are, quite honestly, man-made, you know, one man will have a degree behind his name and say, this is that. And everybody goes, oh, well, we now have the decision. You need to look at the spirit of it all. Because I think that, especially you two being a married couple, working in the name of Yehovah to bring out this truth, that he's going to work with you and bring you those things. And, you know, and it might be grand to think of, but I think he does that so that the truth really will come out. And there are things we can't put our finger on. And those who are just not of faith at all won't ever see it. But those who are will see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I guess. Thank you. That's
you know
the
what I'm
kind
saying?
thing to say, and I hope so. I hope he is using us.
The tricky thing about the scholarship is that, as everyone knows, just like when you're looking for a study, you can find someone who says, you know, red meat will kill you, and someone who says it'll save the world. And it's the same with some of this history too. Not to the same degree, but you can find competing
definitely
opinions if you look for them. Yeah.
No one thinks about, okay, so your Christian friend comes to you and says, look, I found this article by this professor that says the origins of Christmas were Christian before they were pagan. And if you look into the personal life of most professors who say this sort of thing, this is what I found in doing research, there's often a religious bias of they are Christians or they're affiliated with the church in some manner. Does it not behoove them to try to find something in the research? And this is what other professors told me when we were in Germany. that one professor, what was his name? Hal, I think. I can't remember exactly, I'm sorry. If he's watching this. But he said, there's always bias behind the studies, and why wouldn't there be? You wouldn't spend years of your life doing a deep research into the date of Christmas without some kind of idea of what you're going to arrive at. And hopefully everyone is being totally honest with themselves. Hopefully we are when we're doing the documentary, and hopefully they are when they're doing their research, so that the truth will be known. I mean, that's what we're trying to get at here. And it's not always happen.
Right. I think that's just, we've hit the nail on the head here in our last minute, and that is, we're fighting really here against what is of God and what is of man, really, even behind the reasons for it, or those who write the research papers and say, yes, this. Is it man-made or is it of God, right? I mean, that's really what this all is about. So guys, thank you. We're not done yet. Will you come back next week and share more?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have another whole project, your latest project we haven't even touched on yet. We'll do that next week, okay?
That's
all right, so thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Luke and Katie and their kids will join us next week. We'll hope you will too. Until then, Shavua Tov, have a great week.
Shalom, Torah fans. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Tap the subscription button and the bell icon. And I promise to update weekly with in-depth biblical research. Be sure to download the new michaelrood.tv app for both mobile and home devices for even more commercial-free content.